Okay, this is my cut to just spontaneously remember what I had to do with these guys back in the day. So I went to Catholic school in LA, and in the graduated from the 8th grade in the fall of 73, and or excuse me, the summer of 73, 74, sorry. Let me start over. You can cut that stuff. But basically, I went to Holy Name of Jesus School, graduated from the 8th grade in 1974, and I had taken a placement exam for Loyola High. I didn't know how well I had done on that placement exam, but I suppose it was pretty good. In either case, my folks didn't want to put me in the local public school, which would have been Dorsey High, although my brothers ended up going there. I was the smart kid. So there was a busing program from my neighborhood, which was around Crenshaw and Jefferson, and some friends of mine, one of my best friends, lived over in the Audubon School District, and Audubon was the other junior high school, and I was a little further north than Audubon, and I was in the Mount Vernon School District, but I didn't go to Mount Vernon. I went to Catholic school anyway. So there was already some slots available for kids from my neighborhood to go to the better schools in the city, which include Fairfax, University High, and Palisades. So in order for me to get a proper education, my parents were ready to collaborate with my friend's parents, who was in the Audubon district, to get me one of those slots to be bused out to Palisades. Palisades was the high school that I wanted to go to. So in order to get that started, that summer, the summer of 74, I went to Paul Revere Junior High, and Paul Revere was the feeder school into Palisades High School. So I went and I took a shop class and a PE class. The shop class was with Schutze, and the PE class was with Merriman. And those were both characters straight out of Characterville. But that was the first time in my life I had ever gone to school with white kids. And it was an interesting kind of thing. I ended up hanging out with the long hairs. And at that time, I had the big fro. I liked tumbling, and I had this wicked wit. And so I was almost immediately popular. And my nickname was Bo, and because I used to practice with a staff. Everybody wanted to be Bruce Lee in those days. So everybody had nunchucks, and I had a broomstick cut off at both ends. And then we put electric tape and bicycle grips on it. I don't know if I put really good grips like Oakley grips on mine, but I already had a skateboard. So that previous Christmas, I got a skateboard, and so I had a Makaha, and it was green, was elliptical. It didn't have a kick tail on it. It was just kind of flat. And the reason was I like street luge. So I saved my money. I built it up. I had this fluorescent green Makaha board, and I put on some Chicago trucks, because you had to get Chicago trucks. And then I ended up getting the big Stoker wheels. Now everybody was kind of liking Cadillac wheels at the time, but I like Stokers. And then I got whistling Stokers. So it made some whistling sounds as I rode my board. We have a hill right up on West Boulevard near the 10 freeway. And I don't know if they had rebuilt that bridge across there, but it's a cul-de-sac that went up the hill because the freeway is like behind this gigantic berm. And so that's where me and my buddies would skateboard, and we would do the street luge. And I was, kind of thought that I had invented it, and I certainly didn't call it street luge. I called it backboarding. And we said, let's go backboarding. And everybody was like, oh, okay, yeah, like that. But, as the kids, we would always do tic-tacs and 360s and stuff like that in the middle of our street, which had just been repaved. So that was really cool that our street was really smooth, smoother than the sidewalk in those days. So I ended up at Paul Revere that summer, and I ended up hanging out with the cool kids. And for me, it was kind of amazing because these kids had power in school that, like, I never experienced. These kids would talk back to teachers and get away with it, and I was like, dang, it must be nice to be rich. And that was the first time I saw a lot of kids who wore braces. My friend E, he had braces because he got hit in the mouth with a football, chipped his front teeth out, and so he ended up going to the orthodontist, and it was costing like $100 a month or something like that for braces. And I was like, dang, that's more than we pay for our house, because our house was on Wellington Road, and it was mortgaged to Lomas and Nettleton. And I remember our house note was, it was either $177 a month or $77 a month. 3-bedroom, biggest backyard on the street, two car garage in the back, and that was our house. And we were right in the our house was in the middle of our street, and we were 5 kids. I was the oldest, and we were pretty popular. So when I started skateboarding, my 2 brothers, Brian and David, were skateboarding too. They didn't have Makaha, they had Banes. They had Bane or Bond boards, and they both had the kick on the back. And I don't know if they got the new trucks, but they definitely had the soft urethane wheels. So, we would do our skating and stuff like that. And so I'm hanging out with the kids at Paul Revere that summer of '74, where it was like all about Bruce Lee and skateboarding. And I had some rainbow tape on my green board. And so right out on the field where we went and do PE, there was some basketball courts, and there was a asphalt berm on the west side. So the street is a north-south, or the school is in a north-south orientation. And so we would do that, and either we get out of shop early, or we did shop, or maybe just after school. And I didn't hang out too much after school because I had a long bus ride back to the city. I took the 76 and the 176. And then, so we would be right over there on the west side of the street where there's this big berm, and the guys who were skating were doing this kind of stylistic kind of thing where it was like, you pretend you're on a wave. And the coolest thing you could do is go up, get your feet way over to the side of you, and then put your other hand down and just go kind of swing around like that. And that was kind of the style that we were all aiming for. And so I could do some of that. And I don't know. I wasn't. It wasn't about being better. It was about being better or worse, because I can tell you, I was a tumbler too. And this is kind of the way the culture is. Like, if you could tumble, or you could skate, or you could, do whatever, you kind of want to be out in public and show off your skills. And so it was just like that, like any other kind of circle of kids, where you're saying, oh, okay, let's do this. Oh, can you do that? Can you do that? And everybody would go through, what they do best. And, you would nail it every once in a while. So I was not so good on the board that I had. So I talked to the guys, and they said, okay, well, we know a guy who's in wood shop who'll cut you a wood board, because you needed a longer wood board to kind of do the surfer style. And I was down with that. So I got my wood board, I don't know how many weeks later. And I can remember that the prior winter, I had gone to New Haven to visit my grandparents, and I got a bomber jacket. It was a gray kind of bubble style bomber jacket, not the one with the fake rabbit, but it was a sweet jacket. I really loved it. So one day it's cold up there, and I painted my board red and yellow, because it was just going to be the most awesome board with some grip tape on it. and I knew that I was ready to put the new trucks on it. And I don't even remember if it was drilled or not, but something happened to my board, and there must be a part of my head that's kind of erased it from my memory. Maybe it split, maybe it broke, or something like that. But I can remember specifically that I had the board in my locker, and I got paint all over my bomber jacket, and I got in trouble for that. So it was red and yellow flecks of paint on my old bomber jacket. And then sometime later, one of the kids in my neighborhood, my brother let him use my skateboard, and he kicked it down the sewer. So I know I had spent at least $60, $70, as a 14-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid, on something I couldn't replace. And so that was kind of the end of my career. But I was definitely hanging out with the kids at Paul Revere. And I certainly would have gone to the bowls and done the jumps and all that kind of stuff in old swimming pools if I had gotten to a point where I could stay there and take the bus later. But my bus trip was 2 hours as it was. So if I stayed till 3 o'clock, that would have been, I would have been in trouble. But I came that close to the gang who was skating those summers at Paul Revere. Then I got accepted to Loyola that year, so I went in the fall of '74, and one of my good friends, O'Connor, that I met at Paul Revere, he came to Loyola too. And of course this was a completely different set of kids. They weren't, long hairs from Palisades who were surfer stuff, who appreciated my jokes, because I was set to be, going to Palisades, I was set to be class clown. And they said, I may have to fight and battle this other guy who was the class clown, but he didn't go to summer school. But they say, Bo, you can do that. Don't worry about it. And so I was the guy running the dozens on the back of the bus and talking big crap about everybody. And I could make you laugh or cry depending on whether you're the object of my bagging. And that was kind of my reputation, but I also wanted to be a skater, and I also wanted to be a kung fu master at the time. I was also good in kind of long distance running. So when Merriman had us run a Superman around the whole school, I was like, no problem. But Merriman was a creepy guy. But that's another story. So I ended up in Loyola, and I wasn't fitting in. They didn't have gymnastics, they didn't have wrestling, and they didn't have a music program. The three things that I was actually good at, that I liked to do. But I got on the swim team, so I became diver, which was varsity. Second semester, O'Connor left. He said, I can't deal with this. These people are too square. And so I stayed around, in Loyola. And then that summer, my new friend Richard told me about junior guards. So I joined junior guards summer of '75, and where was I? Venice Breakwater. So there's the other edge of this whole thing. I'm hanging out at the beach basically every day in Venice Beach, and that's when there were still surfers hanging out, in the piles at POP. And I didn't necessarily meet those guys all the time, but I could recognize them, and I was learning to surf that summer, and I could never get the longboard. I would always get the longboard because we would go paddling, but I was kind of short, and I had a big afro, so I wasn't a really good swimmer. Didn't have much body fat, and I had never done a lot of swimming before. For me, swimming was fun to swim, but the whole point was to get up on the diving board and do flips. So that's how I ended up, knowing about Dogtown and those guys. So I was always like just 1 degree of separation from them. And it was weird the first time I saw the movie that I was like, yeah, I know this. I know that guy. At Peralta, that name sounds familiar. And I didn't read a lot of the magazines. I was more into car magazines, and I was more into Dial a Joke and Firesign Theater and Young Marquis and Dr. Demento at the time. Um, Not so much Monty Python. I don't even know if Monty Python was out, but definitely me and my brother were into the Young Marquis and Dr. Demento. Firesign Theater, not so much, but it was there. And also Dial a Joke. We would just memorize everything, and of course Barnes and Barnes and all that stuff. So that was the style of weird that I was. Mad Magazine, cartoons, but not so much with the superheroes and not too much with the surfer culture. But I was with that. I was close to it, and I could actually surf, and I was a really good body surfer. I mean, I could be out in the ocean all day. So in JG's, we were the Venice. We were kind of the outcasts because we had rivalries with Huntington Beach, with Redondo, with Zuma especially. And so when we would go to the other beaches and hang out, our job was to dig big holes under the lifeguard trucks so that as soon as they moved forward, they would get stuck in the sand. Um, so we just had that kind of outlaw attitude, and it was a lot of fun. That whole summer, '75, um, it was a lot of fun. We used to our big deal was to say, "What did you say? I can't hear you." That was our big. I mean, it was just like so funny that everybody said it all the time, and I didn't really know what cunt was. I knew what twat was, but I didn't know what cunt was. So it was it was interesting that I went home one time to my friend's mother's house, and she calls me and she said, "What did you say? I can't hear you." And she was like, "What? I'm sorry, I just can't hear you." And she says, "I'm telling your mother." She was just so mad at me, and Richard looks at me like, "I can't believe you said that to my mother." And I said, "Well, what?" She says, "Cunt is a bad word too." I didn't know. I didn't know, but that was just that's not how I cursed in my neighborhood, and that's how we cursed out at Venice Beach. So I took the bus again, the Pico bus, all the way out there. So when I got off of Venice Beach, there was a surfboard shop right on Lincoln, and like Santa Monica High School was just west of there, and then Lincoln is the main north-south street, and on the corner of those two streets, and I don't know what the east-west street there was. It wasn't Ocean Park. It was another street. There was a board shop right there. And we used to hang out and watch the guys, make up their boards and talk about waves in the water and how the day was. And like I said, I wasn't a big surfer. I learned how to surf that summer. I didn't have a board. I didn't expect to have a board. I was cool just body surfing. And I can remember sometimes we had 8 foot, sometimes 10 foot waves, and that's when I realized that I reached my limit. So my freshman year, I was 4'8" and 88 pounds. So I was a skinny kid. And when I graduated, I was like 5'7", 150 maybe. So I was always ready to go to the beach and do some body surfing. Didn't have boogie board at first. I don't think anybody had boogie boards, and we looked down on them unless you could get some rocket fins. And if you had rocket fins, that was really cool. So yeah, so that was the first leg and the second leg. The third leg was I ended up going to summer camp in San Diego County, Episcopal Camp Stevens, which was just on the backside of Julian, California. And so I went there, I guess, the following summer as a camper, and then The summer after that, where I'd have been 15, I went into HRL, Human Relations Lab, which was the first part of counselor training. So that summer was probably 76. The summer after I did JG's, I was either a camp counselor or a camper, probably camper that first summer. And I hung out with guys down from San Diego and Orange County. And sure enough, one of my best friends is Dogtown. And so I don't know if he had a tattoo, but we certainly wrote the graffiti writing for Dogtown. And it was Dogtown Stoners. And I was like, oh yeah, that was, I used to do that up at Venice Beach. I was part of that I wasn't actually part of the surfer clique. I mean, I was certainly not a Val. Nobody considered me a Val. And I was a local because Venice Breakwater JGs, you're local. I mean, you're there, you know the lifeguards, they know you. You go out and swim with the can, swim around the buoy, or around the breakwater if you were really ballsy. I couldn't hang that far. But I was definitely a Venice local. So I could go and, these guys were just like all about tie stick. And so these were a different brand of long hairs from Orange County and San Diego County. And they're just like hanging with Dogtown Stoners and like, hell, you can get some great tie stick from these guys. And I can remember just hanging out with these guys at camp. My boy Dan and Cody. Was it Cody or Kobe? Probably Cody. And Tad. We were just like, we were the cool dudes. We put together our football team, which was called the something bowl. I can't remember. When I was quarterback of our team called the Roaches, and we won the game. So I got to be something of a hero at camp that summer, hanging out with this guy. And Dan, I still remember Dan could play Stairway to Heaven on his guitar, and that was just cool. And I was never the kind of guy that went out and asked for weed, but I never refused it. And I never, in my life, I never bought any, but, I remember that's what you did, as a teenager. I never drunk alcohol until I was 26 years old. I was not into getting high. It was not, I was into being funny and being athletic and, the as you would expect, the scholar, athlete, Catholic school kind of kid. And I was a big brother, so I had to be, more heroic. But it was really weird after all those years, people and things I had forgotten and not brought to mind when this movie came out. And I said, oh man, I was right in the middle of that. And even after high school, when I was working, by the time I was like 18 or 19 years old, I would definitely wear the 80s shorts and go out to the beach and do the roller disco. And that's when I intersected probably it was a different world then. By the time we had, cones up at Venice Pavilion, and you would skate as fast as you could, going backwards between the cones. That was the big deal to do. And that was a lot of fun. That was the roller disco. And I can remember the Donna Summer, I'm a Wanderer. And that's what I would do. I had one of those tearaway shirts when they first came out, just kind of nylon tearaway football jerseys. I like to wear those. And I had the gradient glasses. And I had my short skating shorts. And I would be, with the serious roller disco skates. And I would go to Venice Beach. And that's when the guys in BMX started to show up. But definitely as a skater, as a roller skater, there were stunts that you could do in between the cones and right in front of the Venice Pavilion. And that was one of the things that I did too. So it was all, part of Southern California. We all wanted to be Evel Knievel. We all wanted to ride in dune buggies, and this really connected with me, and I remember it all fondly. So these days now, I've lived across the country and I've had a lot of work and traveling, and my wife and I said, we were living in Atlanta where our two daughters were born, and we're like, we got to get back to LA, because New York was too fast and Atlanta was too slow, and neither of them was as cool as Southern California. So we came back, and in the end, we ended up back here in Redondo Beach. We raised all our kids here, and they went to oh my God, Barrel to Barrel Heights, and then Paris, and then Redondo Union. All three of our kids through here, and so it's a cool thing for me to go back and remember, how I was a beach kid, with my terry cloth shirt and my puka shells and my red junior guard shorts with the patch that I earned, back in the summer of '75. One of the things that they did in JG's that I just realized that they don't do anymore was the shoe race. And the shoe race, basically what you do is you get a line, you draw a line in the sand, and then you get everybody who's going to participate to take off their shoes, and one shoe would stay here, and the whoever's running the game would take the other shoe and throw it out beyond their heads. So you'd be lying on your back, not being able to see where the shoes are, and then we'd have one less shoe. And so then he'd say go, and then you have to get off your back, turn around, eyeball a shoe, sprint to it, and grab it before the next guy. And so at the end of the season for JG's, they had the Taplins, and the Taplins were, there was a big run, swim, run, and this was where you would actually join in competition, if you were studly enough to be considered for the county lifeguards. And I was nowhere near big enough, and I'd only gone 1 year, but I was quick. And I seem to recall that I did very well in the shoe race. I always did well locally when I did it, and something that I brought up my own kids to learn how to do. But they don't do the shoe race anymore. So that's something that has gone with the times. Yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of that. I was never such a bad boy, but I flirted with all those guys with that bad boy culture, and I didn't know what to expect any different. But I knew these were cool things and cool things to do, and I really liked it. It's part of that street culture that grew up in respectability. The interesting thing is, when I saw the Dogtown, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I knew how to write that. Even at my high school, there was a clique of guys who wanted to, we called ourselves the Wolf Pack, because we were, we had to compete with Venice 13, Clanton C14, 18th Street gangs, and Crips and Bloods, and that was real part of street culture in those days, because you'd be walking down the street and somebody says, "Oh, what set you from?" And you gotta say, "Yeah, I'm independent, I'm cool." And he says, "Okay, I want you to say this: Crips are cool, but Pyru rule." Okay, Crips are cool, but Pyru rule. Okay, I'll let you slide, homie. And so there was always some kind of street culture that you were competing with, and you couldn't let your guard down. And so there's a kind of an awareness. But in Wolfpack, we wanted to bomb walls, and my friend Todd, who I think he was in Beverly Hills, but he was definitely a West Sider, and he was the one who was really enthusiastic about that. And Kono was like the best graffiti artist that we had, but we would study that style, which had degenerated. It was long before the wild style, but it was like a square letters, and you would use canes and top hats and crosses and banners, and that was part of it. And then you would put the name of all of your gang members in that. I was Jinx, Jinx, and my logo was a top hat and cane, and I could still write that way. So it was really interesting to see how Dogtown wrote their stuff, and how even that old school graffiti has kind of gone away. But when you look at the Dogtown in the cross, that was the style in those days. I didn't learn that until sophomore years. That would have been '76 when I started writing and drawing graffiti that kind of way. And then I got into pinball, and there's a whole big story behind me and pinball on Figueroa and Adams, where we went to the arcade there, which was a Smorgasburger. I can't remember the name of but that was the best pinball arcade in the city, over near USC. And we would go there when we had open campus at lunch as juniors. We played bow and arrow, and that was when Best of My Love by The Emotions was like at the top of the charts, and Eagles, New Kid in Town. So these are all kind of adventures around street culture that I was a part of in all different parts of LA in the mid '70s, and it was an interesting and fascinating place to be, and I'm glad I could share some of that with you. I've written a lot of this down, but I wanted to put it on video so that this might end up in an archive someplace, and you can check all that stuff. Like I said, I didn't really connect with the people who became famous, and I was never really trying to be famous. I was just doing that stuff because that was the stuff to do. Oh, the one thing I wanted to remember to say that is I used to go to Hollywood and skate in Hollywood with my short pants. And that's where I met Angelo Moore, because Angelo went to Audubon High School, and all the guys in Fishbone were there as well. And I loved Fishbone. I thought they were the best band in the world. I mean, literally. And there's a lot of people like me who say the same thing. But Angelo was one of the best pop lockers ever. And he's the one that taught me how to do this thing. And he would do it. He would bend his fingers to ridiculous notions and do that thing. And he also would be on Hollywood Boulevard, pop locking and roboting for some spare change. And he was a pretty good skater too. I don't even remember if he was bald at the time, but I remember him and another guy, and I can't remember his name. Ruben. I think his name was Groovin' Ruben. Yeah, Groovin' Ruben was a cool dude too. And he and I had kind of the same style, where we would wear glacier glasses or schoolboys and have the flat top, like Homeboy from Cameo. And we'd wear the big shoulder jackets. So Groovin' Ruben and I had the same kind of style when it came to clothes. And he was another guy out at Venice Beach. Of course, Harry Perry, and the rollerblading guitar guy in the chic outfit. And then the Swami. The Swami was the old guy who would just like rant all these conspiracy theories. I'm just trying to catch all the people out of that who became famous. Of the break dancers, my younger brother did break dancing too. Well, it wasn't break dancing at that time; it was pop locking, and he wore the white gloves and the black clothes, and that was the kind of thing there. Shabadoo, I think, came down to Venice Beach. The young kid from Electric Boogaloo who danced with the broom. I can't remember his name, but I remember he would tumble, and those were the best guys. I mean, those are the absolute best. I could tumble. I didn't have a double back, but I had a layout back, and I had an Arabian, and I had a full twisting back. So I could run and do fronts. I could do, generally I would do, round off flip flop back, and that would be enough. Then I do the flip flops in place where you just don't move. I could probably do 6 flip flops in a back. That would be a lot of energy. My favorite was the Arabian, which was a half twisting back, and of course, having the full, that was just like that was my pièce de résistance. That's where I ruled. And when I did tumbling, I did tumbling after swimming. So Dorsey Pool, Inglewood Pool, at Centinela Park, of course down at Venice Beach. I wasn't so good at the time at Venice, so I don't know if I ever went out to Venice to do a lot of tumbling. But definitely Dorsey Pool, definitely Centinela Park, Will Rogers Park, and Sportsman's Park. I would tumble at those places when I got good. Tumbling was part of my diving, and I did the diving too. So that was definitely the street culture. That was the thing that I was absolutely the best at. And I never put money into a new skateboard, interestingly enough. So that covers a lot of this, and I hope this was informative to you. I did all this straight from memory, but I knew I had to capture it because it's not likely that anybody's going to ask me these questions. I was prompted by this because I'm going to go next week to Venice. I went back to Venice this past weekend to see if I could find a parking space, because I'm going to go next week next week, I don't know exactly when, with Atlas Obscura, and they're gonna do their thing about Dogtown and talk about that. Let me think a little bit more about what I can remember. I never remember being a kid and going to POP. I remember my dad. We had a '68 VW bus, and we would take kids in the neighborhood up to Angeles Crest, but also we would go to the beach every once in a while. And we were going to go to POP, and we brought a bunch of the neighbor kids, and they didn't bring any money, and nobody had enough money to get them in. So the one time I was going to get a chance to go to POP, my bonehead neighbors messed that up. But I also remember that my dad knew somebody who lived on Ocean Park, literally on one of those houses on the right, before the new condos had come up, and she was a puppeteer. And she had marionettes, really expensive marionettes. And I was like bored to death, but I was like, here's somebody who has these hundreds of dollars in marionettes, and they kind of do that kind of thing. I remember that. I admit that I liked Xanadu, the movie, and I liked Electric Light Orchestra. Sue me. Because, that was part of the skate culture. Later on, in my later teens, definitely went to Rosita, definitely went to Flippers, definitely went to World on Wheels, definitely did a lot of skating. Also Starlight. I skated with Jody Watley at Starlight because they had a producer crew called Alima and Company. And Alima and Company was the best roller disco producers out there before World on Wheels got big, because Rosita and Starlight were the #1 places, except for Hollywood Rink, which was on Hollywood Boulevard in Western, and that was the big rink. And that's when you would do the all skate and the men's skate and the backward skate, and they would call it out, and the couple skate, and I just remember certain music from that time, probably the OJs or the Stylistics or something like that. When I hear the song, I'll know. But I did a lot of skating. And that's LA, SoCal culture. I could go and talk about BMX. I might as well mention BMX because I did build a dirt bike. By the way, the Schwinn store on Santa Barbara before it came King, right over next to Hall's Bookstore on Santa Barbara and Hillcrest, across from that burger joint. I know the Dulons owned the burger joint. It wasn't Fat Burger, it was something else, but on Hillcrest and King. But the Schwinn stop next to Hall's Bookstore. Hall's Bookstore, my parents were friends with the Halls, and my 6th grade teacher was Judy Milliken, and she was a white girl adopted by the black parents of Hall's Bookstore, and she was my favorite teacher in elementary school. She went to USC. She almost had a heart attack when I told her I wanted to go to UCLA, but I ended up going to USC anyway. But that Schwinn shop, as well as Carl's Toys and Hobbies, but Schwinn was really the hub of a lot of bike building and skateboard building that we did in LA, right in the Crenshaw Shopping Center. And so that was definitely the place where I got my trucks and my Stokers and my rainbow tape. I got my rainbow tape from Pep Boys, now that I think about it. And I had a mini bike. I had a mini bike at Pep Boys. Got busted for that. Oh my God. So I had a lot of fun as a kid. We did build dirt bikes. And I built mine with a Senator. I had a Senator bike that I got from Fedco. It was a green one. For some reason, I like green. I had a green skateboard and a green Senator. And then we built choppers. First, it was building choppers. That was the big deal. You get a big giant sissy bar, and everybody wanted to have an Apple Crate or, one of the crate bikes. But ultimately, we started putting the back tires on the front, and then my brother David was the first to get a Moto Mag, and he had a gold bike, and we all got the crossbar, the BMX handlebars, and FMF forks or Oakley grips, and that was the big deal. And we cracked frames, we jumped the bikes, we did all kinds of stuff. We went to Motorcycle Hill, we went to 3 Dips. But the one thing that I did that was completely and totally unique is me and my boy Donald. Donald lived around the corner on Virginia Road at the alley, and we built a tandem dirt bike. So we put our 2 bikes together, hooked the whole thing up so that my front fork went on his back wheel, and I rode the back and he rode the front. And it was weird because we couldn't switch. I wanted to ride the front, but when I tried it, I couldn't do it. It took us a long time to be able to coordinate that, but we could get up. We got that dirt bike together, a tandem dirt bike, which I've not seen before or since. And we'd ride up and down Crenshaw, and people would honk their horns. And I had a Craig audio cassette boombox, before JVC had come into play and all that. And we had that on the front. So we'd be jamming some Isley Brothers up and down Crenshaw on our tandem dirt bike. And that was the move. But yeah, building bikes was a fun thing too. I never got into cars, but bikes and skateboards, I tear them down and put them back together, and had my own little thing of grease too. I could put together Bendix brakes, take them apart, put them back together, spin those wheels, be perfectly silent and smooth. Those were the days, the 70s in Los Angeles, street culture, Dogtown, LA, Central Crenshaw. That was the world. That was the world. It was a good world. It was a dangerous world because there were gangbangers all over the place, but it was an exciting world too. That's the way I remember it. So, thanks for listening. Talk to you later. This is Michael David Cobb Bowen, and I'm out.